Okay, good. And maybe I'll just say that framing again, just so that it's all together, which is, tonight on our last class, our siyum, our collection, our gathering of all of our kernels. The frame that I was reading these two stories through in prep for tonight is this this intentionality around when we leave. What do we leave behind and how do we leave? And then, as both of the stories kind of point to, what happens when we return and how we return. So in the spirit of Pesach, when we are, clearing out and letting go and leaving behind, literally going through the sea, leaving Egypt behind, leaving the narrow place, what is it that we actually find on the other side? So, and the other note I just wanted to make just in opening is, I was mentioning before, the book was originally written in Hebrew by Dr. Calderon, and it was translated into English, but the Hebrew title is something interesting, which is, it's called Hashuk, Habayit, and Halev, the market, the house, and the heart. And I was thinking about that, the Hebrew, that progression, which is, the shuk is like, the hustle bustle, where everything, tomatoes to, who knows, thumbtacks. It's like kind of the world meets and there's no order to it. There's nothing personal about it in some ways. And then habayit, which the house, which we've been talking about in these multiple contexts of, the physical space, the role of women as habayit, the role of woman as literally a house. And then the last one, halev, the heart. I think really speaking to the thread of, intimacy and complexity within each of the stories that we've read so far, and the way that I almost just kind of like felt tortured in reading these two. Feels like the heat got turned up even more. So, but it's interesting to just note what she originally titled this collection as, the market, the house, and the heart. And the sensationalism, I think, of, calling it a bride for one night, of course, in the way that the translator chose to retitle it. Okay. Any other thoughts or comments just from the crew?
I wanted to say, I listened to a talk by Dr. Calderon that she gave in 2011 to people in Boston. And John had last week mentioned the cover picture, the iconic picture, and they talked about the picture and that it was an important picture to her to put on this cover, and that the woman, according to her, she couldn't tell what the woman was really feeling, and that the woman actually had a date with the guy on the Vespa, if you see the whole picture. So she's both distressed, but she's walking down the street full of men that are catcalling and looking at her. There's something about being able to do that. And it related personally to Dr. Calderon in that when she studied Talmud, she was one of the only women in the class amongst a lot of men. So there was a connection for her with that.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. And Janine or John, I remember, John, you gave the citation of the photo. Where did you actually find that? I was looking for that today. Is it I looked in the front cover, I looked in the back cover.
It's not in the book.
I happened to read a story about it maybe a few months ago, and then here it shows up on this cover of this book.
Wow! So can you do, because speaking of the context of the story, it's weird
Ruth,
that it's
not weird. It's Ruth. John had mentioned it's Ruth Orkin, who was
Okay.
an American photographer, and she was in Italy. This is taken in 51, the picture, and she was in Florence, and this is a picture of her friend, and they went for a walk, and she was photographing her friend walking through Florence. And this was one of the pictures that became an iconic picture. So I managed to find the whole picture. You can see the whole picture on the internet. It's
Wow. Will you put the link in the chat if you could, Janine?
I don't have it on me, but I could send it to you,
Okay.
and you can send it to
Yeah,
everybody.
that would be so great.
And
Rabbi,
I can also send the link to the talk,
Oh,
which if
perfect.
people are interested, it's just a wonderful
I would
talk.
love that. Yeah.
And she talks about sisters. Also, that it's a great.
Oh, cool.
So,
Yeah, I would love to. That's great. Thank you. How timely for both of you to have come across it. Noah.
Just while Janine was talking, I flipped over to YouTube and I found the link of one of her talks based on this book, and I put the link in the chat. It's like an hour long or something, a teaching on the bride for one night.
Okay.
Just
Great.
letting people know it's there.
Thank you. That's awesome. Yeah, and it's funny when it's weird also that it's not attributed considering the content of her book. I mean, that's kind of a strange, like kind of gigantic omission, I would say. I wonder, having just spoken with the folks who are publishing my next book, you know, every detail is so kind of ached over. And when I saw the photo, I actually thought it was her. I thought it was, or she, I thought it was Dr. Calderon herself, because if any of you have seen photos of her, she is stunning and very dark featured and just very dramatic kind of, I don't know, shapes of her cheekbones. And she comes across very much as this gorgeous powerhouse. So I actually thought it was her, and it's so interesting that it's like 1951 when you look at her sandals, and you know, it's like, I think as John said, you know, a few weeks ago, it's like this timeless image. John.
Yes, Rabbi, if you just type in Ruth Orkin, and it'll come right up. It is her most famous picture, and
cool.
you can see the whole thing. So just Ruth Orkin will do it.
Okay. How do you spell the last name, John?
Orkin.
Orkin. Okay. Okay, great. Amazing. So with
and one last thing, the link Noah put in is the talk that I listened to.
Oh, cool.
And the second link is the photo.
You all. If you want to find something fast, call Noah. It's amazing. That's great. Thank you. Okay, so tshuva, you know, in Hebrew, the first story would be called Hatshuva, the return, which is, you know, of course, even that is very what's the word? Evocative. Of when you think about, you know, tshuva is often equated with forgiveness and the high holidays, but it's simply about, it literally means to return. So let's get this piece of ketubot on the table. Does somebody want to read it? Noah, do you want to read this one?
I would love to.
Okay, cool.
Rabbi Hama Bar Bisa went and sat for 12 years in the study house. When he planned to return home, he said, I will not do what Ben Hakanai did. He stopped at the local study house and sent a letter to his wife. Rabbi Oshaya, his son, came and sat before him, but Rabbi Hama Bar Bisa did not recognize him. He asked him questions of law. Rabbi Hama Bar Bisa saw that he was a brilliant student and grew faint. He said, if I had stayed here, I could have had a son like this. He went home. Rabbi Oshaya entered behind him. Rabbi Hama bar Bisa stood before him, thinking, he is surely coming to ask me another question of the law. His wife said to him, does a father stand before his child? Ketubot 62b. Bereshit Ketubot 62b.
Yeah, wow. Thanks, Noam. Yeah, to hear it again after reading her comments, I always find so kind of, I don't know, stripping in some way. You know, it's like you kind of return to the bones of the story, and it's if you had that experience, you know, of like both with commentary and without, it's a very common disorientation, similar to reading any kind of Jewish text, which is, you know, there's the
Rabbi,
the
I think
shot.
there's maybe something in your background or someone. No,
It's
maybe it's me.
in terms of sound, Lucy.
Yes, maybe it's me. Let me check my.
Okay.
My.
Opa. Is everybody else okay hearing?
I don't hear anything.
Okay.
Either.
But always speak up. That's great. It's just, it's interesting. And, you know, those of you who have studied or will study other types of Jewish text, to read kind of the simple text and then to read it with the comments. I just, again, encourage us all, like, you know, what's possible in your own midrash, you know, before you read theirs. So did anybody have any kind of realizations, like in hearing Noah just read it, of like what you would have made of it differently than what Dr. Calderon did, or like questions, why did she go there? Or yeah, Noah.
I just thought the timeline doesn't make sense because he's been gone for 12 years, and when he comes back, his child is now a rabbi. And that seems like that takes more than 12 years to go from being a young child to being a rabbi. So I thought the timeline seemed off.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, you know, how the Talmud, and in those days they used the title of Rav, is quite different than today. You know, they didn't have grad school programs, but it was possible at age 12 to be considered a teacher of others, so that it could be used in that way. But it's true, you know, how old was he? Did he even know he had a child?
It does say, it
Yes.
does say at one point that the son was at least a toddler before he
Oh,
left.
right,
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
Because he was
Toddling around.
underfoot all the time.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
In
good
her
point.
version that she wrote, yeah.
Right, yeah.
But I guess that would make sense to me then if he could be 13 or 14 and be considered a rav, because in today's world, it wouldn't matter if you were a toddler, you would not be a rabbi by the time your father was gone for 12 years.
Unless you did it online in like a day, right?
He'd have to miss his
ministry.
bar mitzvah, you know?
Right. Yeah, well, those came much later, just to name. It's not like they were doing bar bat mitzvah in
And he
Talmudic
was
times.
a brilliant student early on. I mean, I don't think there was any question that they would have recognized his brilliance. If his father realized how brilliant he was in basically a few minutes,
Mm-hmm.
you know, he would have stood out early on.
Right.
They just skipped a generation with that brilliance, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking about that as well. As you know, we've heard so often her, the author, you know, remind us they were kind of mediocre. You know, there were all these
Yeah.
high hopes, but they were actually pretty mediocre, which is an interesting thread that she pulls through. What
Yeah,
else
and I just want to
Geraldine?
indicate that she refers to the son as a young student on page, in my book 51. So she doesn't say, other than he was bright and he well-spoken, but she says a local student recognized his cloak and he was jolted out of his reveries. A local student, anyway. So the
Mhm.
boy greeted him with words. So she refers to him as a young person.
Yeah, that's
in
a
her
good point.
story anyway.
Yeah, and it could have, the Talmud is then the capturing of the oral tradition. So it could have been that the Talmud then attributed that now, he is rabbi, but it could have been retelling of what happened to him earlier. Mark.
Mhm.
The most curious line in the story to me was when he said, "If I had stayed here, I could have had a son like this."
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I just thought that says a lot about him, right? That all of this, his wisdom, his great learning, his love for the Torah, was needed, in an environment to produce, something like this. And yet we find out it is his son, and his son is brilliant, and he's a rabbi, and he asks great questions, and he knows the law, and he really had nothing to do with it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And couldn't have really, his son would have outstripped him so fast in terms of the son's brilliance that the son would not really have taken anything from him, after he was a few years old, So, yeah, the guy was mediocre all the way around.
Lucy and then Noah.
Well, I think I want to say two things. One, not to read these stories too much like our world, to think that their world was like our world, I think is probably, it's fine, but I think it's not really the way that the Talmud kind of uses a lot of metaphor and analogy. But I think what I loved about this story was for me, the message was all about not recognizing, what gifts you've been given, right? So, here he was given a child who would have been, just the apple of his eye, and such a great scholar, but he didn't recognize it. He went far away, and he was like, I'm going to teach other people, and didn't really work out for him that well. And I just think that's so much like life, like we just don't see what we're given, our blessings, and instead we think we have to run and work real hard for them, and grasp them, and boy, it doesn't always work out, and gosh, that's not fair. And then you come home and there you are, you have just what you always wanted that you walked away from.
But I felt bad for the rabbi on one level, in that when you've got a parent who is just the best of whatever it is they do, the best doctor, the best lawyer, the best rabbi, and you come along and you feel the pressure of living up to that.
Mm.
And in your mind, you've inflated it even more than it already was, so that it becomes this impossible thing for you to ever achieve. You know what I mean? And then to come home and realize that he missed what was there already and what was developing there at home while he was sitting in the study house, basically being ignored, I think.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't attract students. He couldn't get into the complexities of things. And so some part of him, I think, knew he was failing in that. And then he goes home, sees his son, and knows that he missed that opportunity. So he failed there too.
Thanks, Marcia. Yeah. Noah, I think, was next, and then Ellen.
I've spoken once. I'd rather hear Ellen before I speak again.
It's okay. It's okay. No, go ahead.
Okay. Well, I was just thinking that I think that part of what happened why he wasn't great was because he left. And I thought that was the point, that he could have been great if he had stayed home, but he just saw himself as the backyard of his father's house instead of taking his time to learn. And obviously that son studied with the brilliant father. By taking himself away from brilliance and going to strangers, he made himself lesser. So if he had stayed home, he would have still been a more wonderful person than he was by leaving his own father and disrespecting his honor your father and mother kind of thing. And so I thought that he never had potential, because it says he was promising in the beginning, and far away beckoned him, so that he screwed himself over by not honoring his father's brilliance and staying to learn like his son did. So
Wow.
I just kind of saw it as he hurt himself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
And
love
hurt his
know
whole
that
family
you,
doing so.
I'm sorry, what was the last sentence?
And how he hurt his whole family by doing so.
Mhm.
They all lost each other. It was a terrible tragedy.
Yeah, I think it's really important that you brought up the geography, that he was in the back of his dad's house. I mean, that setting is really key. Ellen.
Well, the thing that really bothered me about the story was that he's in this community of men who are all studying, and obviously some of them are, capable, have these ethical observations about leaving your family, because they write stories like this with a teaching like that. But no one ever took him aside and said, have you thought about going home? So, I mean, it made me wonder what was their responsibility toward each other? Was this just like a totally intellectual world where the shining, brilliant ones are the ones that get noticed? And then along those same lines, it was really fascinating to find out, she said that there was apparently a dispute between the
What page are you on, Ellen?
on page 54, the last paragraph. She said that there was a dispute between scholars of the land of Israel and their Babylonian counterparts about whether a student should leave home to study Torah.
Yeah.
So it was a live issue, apparently, whether it was a good thing or not for this man to do what he did.
Yeah. And this, I think it's so great. Ellen, I wanted to look at those questions. So thank you for bringing them back. Yeah, on page 50, it says in the first few years at the very top, he would write letters home, but after a while, it was hard for him to even do that. He found refuge in the routines of daily learning, and then he slept with who he slept with, then he thought of his son, and he took comfort. But yeah, this notion of kind of insularity and being, seduced by it or succumb to it or just numb to it on some level is we've seen that in a few stories over and over. It's just the kind of the walls of the Beit Midrash get thicker and thicker and the door gets smaller and smaller. And it's, I definitely can relate to that, Seth. There is a sense that, it's interesting what's coming to my mind. I have that experience actually in being a parent now, that when I'm with my daughter, it's one world that is so special and unique and tender. And sometimes it's hard to leave that, not just to leave her, but there's a sense of unique worlds, and I'm sure can all, connect that to our own lives, but it is hard to leave one world and go to another. One world, even if it becomes Egypt, it was hard for us to leave Egypt. Egypt became comfortable. So yeah, Geraldine.
Yes, well, I had reflections on the last couple of lines on page 54 and then the last lines.
Oh, good. Will you actually read those questions out because they're really
So-
tremendous.
What caught my attention was the Torah teaches, quote, in the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. In other words, as this story may be suggesting, first a man must find a woman and bind himself to her, and only then can he reflect the image of God and live a life of Torah. And where this led me really was to the fact that women they are at the crux that a man can't live a life of Torah without the woman, even though she's denied much of the studying and practice around the religion. And that is, to me, was reflected in the child who stayed home and learned from the mother. The mother was the one who was, I think, giving the child, not so much the grandfather, maybe, but the mother was the one who was binding him to, or reflecting the image, enabling him to reflect the image of God and live the life of Torah. So to me, even though it was unspoken directly, there was this big issue about women that came up in this and their power and agency.
I love that. Yeah, and even the sentence before that, Geraldine, maybe the storyteller is ascribing a certain power to a man's wife, known in the Talmud as his home, because only in her presence can he find inner peace.
Right.
That there's some, you have to have something to leave in order to leave. Like, yeah, would these men have left had they not, gotten married? Had there not been something to leave? And the home, remember also that they're leaving their home to go to another house, which is the house of study. So it's almost trading one home for another, because you end up, it used to be that the Talmidim would sleep on the benches in there. They literally never go home.
That also begs the issue of the two terms, home and house. I don't think anywhere in here did it ever say home of study. It always says house of study, which implies something different than a home. To me.
Yeah, I think that's powerful. Yeah, and we have, in Jewish life, we have the Beit Knesset, which is the house of study, the house of gathering, the shul, sanctuary, the Beit Midrash. So and the house of study. But they are both houses rather than homes.
And it may not be like that in Hebrew, but to me in English, home and house are not completely interchangeable.
Yeah, but they can hear you now.
I also, one other little sideline was these stories about the men and the rabbis who were studying really made me think about my family and my mother always talking about her grandfather who lived with them in this large family. And she described him as lying in bed all day studying Torah. And he had a long white beard and everybody would cater to him. Serve him. And that image just keeps coming up throughout these stories.
Wow.
I wish here.
Geraldine, that's just amazing.
I know
that you have that kind of lived, image. That was your mom's?
My mother's grandfather. So it would have been my great grandfather, but I never met him. And she talked about food up to him, sitting with him. I was like, oh, really? I was always just taken aback by this man.
Wow. I feel like you should paint that, or I don't know, there's something there. We need Marjorie on this Zoom. That's just so because when you think about it, it's what, 4 generations later, here you are, learning Talmud.
Wow.
You should definitely go in your bed tonight and have someone bring you something. I don't care what it is.
Stroke my long white beard.
Forget the beard. No, just kidding. You know, Judaism in sign language, one of the signs for it is the beard.
Mm.
Like how you say Jewish is this. It's really very deep. Yeah. I just wanted to point out there's a great reference on page 55, which is Professor Daniel Boyarin. I think he's still at Berkeley, but he's kind of the leading scholar on kind of homosexuality within the Talmud and sexuality in general related to the study of Torah and Talmud. And he's just an incredibly complex and very out there in an amazing way scholar. So if you're ever looking for a book, Carnal Israel, is definitely one to wrap your whatever around. Sorry, I hope it's okay to be a bit crude occasionally. Okay, so let's go to A Bride for One Night. Yeah.
I have just a question.
Yeah.
From the initial story,
Yeah,
where the
please.
wife says to him, "Does a father stand before his child?" What is she meaning?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm so glad you brought it up. There's a lot there. Typically, a child would rise before a son. I mean, it says it on the front of the bus in Israel, you should rise before your elders. So typically that's a very, choreographed scene that an elder would not rise for a young person. But there's also the who's in front of who, in terms of kind of choreography. Rav Oshaya entered behind him, and then Rav Hama stood in front of him. So he must have repositioned. There's a lot of different kind of positioning going on. And then she added a really very interesting nuance where, does anybody remember? I think the son is holding a glass of wine on Shabbat, and I think that's where she got a little bit of the, the sense of, was the son had this, how much of the man's, role had the son taken on, including sleeping with his mother potentially. There was just that kind of ambiguity there.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like he'd become the man of the house and a respected, Torah scholar. But yeah, I do want us to have time to talk about A Bride for One Night.
Great. Yeah, here we go. Okay, Lucy, read us the text. Yeah, thank you.
A Bride for One Night. When Rav would visit the city of Tarshish, he would announce, "Who will be mine for a day?" And when Rav Nachman would visit the city of Shachnetziv, he would announce, "Who will be mine for a day?" That's from Yoma 18b.
Oh my gosh, I love the name of the city, Shatneziv, which means Shatnez is the type of forbidden combination of fabrics, the wool and the linen. So even there you have this kind of like little mention of, ooh, let's combine two things that shouldn't be combined. So what do you hear, Lucy? You lead us a little bit. What did you take?
Well, I mean, it's so shocking because, of course, the moral standards were so high, and we recognize that this is really, this is different. So, I immediately went to a sort of a metaphysical interpretation. Like, okay, so what is this? You know, the four rabbis going to Pardes. Is this, you know, the trip to the spiritual orchard where you say, you know, who'll be my consort here? Because it just seems almost impossible that this would be real. But if in fact it's real, there must be this sort of Kama Sutra energy here, right? That there's a holy joining that can happen, and the right partner will be available for each of these amazing, you know, Rav and Rav Nachman. I mean, these are like such high level human beings. It's just really hard to sort of wrap my arms around, though.
Mhm. Joan, Lucy, Maxine.
One thing
Ralph
that
was
came to my
nodding.
mind,
Go
oh,
ahead.
I'm
Go ahead.
sorry,
Go ahead, Joan.
was this story seemed to echo another side of the one we read about Libertina,
Oh,
that, you know, there perhaps he may have been spilling his seed, so to speak, and here in this story, it's a way to remedy that in a more, I don't know, but I had that thought later this afternoon after I had been totally shocked with the original reading of the story. So just a couple of thoughts. It just seemed to echo that other story with the same
Yeah.
themes, you know.
And when you
So
say that in terms of spilling the seed, like here at least they would spill the seed into a person, like a woman. Is that what you're saying?
yes,
Like, okay.
yes, yes. Here they're not spilling the seed. They're, you know, saving the potential of the future generations in a
Wow.
way, you know.
Yeah. Very interesting. Yeah. So were there lines that stood out to people? I mean, this was just like, I felt like I was reading like a, I don't know, risque, like whatever. It was
I
definitely
know.
a hot story.
It was steamy.
I found it curious. I don't know if it stood out to anybody else, but that there were two women were released. Just the concept itself, the name of the concept is called aguna, which is that if a man does not give a wife a get, she becomes a chained widow. So this legal kind of remedy or pretty radical change happens before this happens. So let me just, does anybody see the part that I'm?
yes.
Okay. On 58 is yeah. Marcia,
On
do
the
you
eve
read
of
that? Yeah.
On the eve of the rabbi's arrival, word spread that he had permitted the remarriage of two chained widows, women who had lost their husbands in a recent flood. A wave of grateful approval washed over the community, and even I was enchanted by the news.
So first of all, I was just curious what happened to the other woman, because, or I guess neither one of these became Rob's person. Maybe I
No.
missed. Okay, so they
No.
were just released to become married to somebody else who was coming through town. But in some ways, you know, maybe that releasing of those two women was Rav saying, you know, you take two, I'll take one, sort of thing, this kind of bargaining of, you know, women in a certain sense. Ellen.
And it put him in a really wonderfully, you know, special light. as
Yeah.
he was arriving to pick up his bride for the night.
Yeah. Ellen, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, maybe this is what everybody's saying anyway, but I think it put him in a special light because I think they're talking about agunas, right? Agunot.
Yes.
And so he had a progressive view.
Hmm.
So I think that's what she might mean by everybody was so tickled, you know, that he came in and he said, you know, no, that because an aguna wasn't free to marry, right, unless the husband said, okay, you're free to marry, which means you know, but if the
Right.
husband died and some before he could say that, then they're chained. They don't have any freedom. So I think it means that he was very progressive. There's a great Yiddish novel called The Aguna by Chaim Grada, which is about you know, this Jewish community that just is engulfed in controversy because of what should they do about an aguna.
Yeah. And
That's
today
what
in
I
Israel,
thought.
it's a, you know, it's a very
Oh yeah,
heartbreaking
right.
Israel issue to see these women who are literally chained. I mean, it's there's a lot of contemporary conversations. It's not a small issue and it definitely has not gone away. And in some ways, the courts are getting, you know, more right wing and stringent and, you know, kind of it's creepy. I mean, it's really very scary and very sad. So he releases these two women and then he kind of, you know, does this little winking dance with this one. Oh no, I see your hand now. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that it seemed to me almost along the lines of grooming when he did that. He came in and made himself the authority on marriage or not marriage. And then he says, I want a woman. So now nobody can question whether or not this is prostitution kind of agreement. You know, he came in as the power person. And regarding Agunat, the Unchained, there's a really good series on High Flicks called Unchained or Agunat. And it's a fiction series, but it's about a rabbi person who's dealing with problems in his own marriage, but it's his job to try to help release women who are chained. And it's very fascinating. But I felt it was kind of predatory for him to come in and be the one to make the decisions about who was married and who wasn't when he comes in asking for something that to me seemed irrational.
Well, when you say irrational, I mean, he had a primal, you know, need or primal itch or whatever you want to call it. So just help me understand when you say irrational.
Oh, well, like everybody is supposed to be very, you know, this is at least my impression of the community at this point is that people are, you know, they don't sleep around. And he basically comes in, I don't know anybody, but I'm just going to sleep with someone for one night and everybody's going to be okay with that. And I'm going to throw her away afterwards. You know, who's mine for tonight? Like I get to possess somebody. It's asking for a prostitute. And I didn't think that was something that people did. You know, I was kind of surprised when I read that she was, you know, maybe kind of lonely and wanted to have sex again. And, you know, that was kind of a draw for her, but also the fact that they said to her, well, you'll get the money from the ketubah when you're released. And that just seemed to me to go all the way back to prostitution. So that's why I thought this was kind of like a dicey, like, how is this even something that the community saw was good? Because, and then they say, you know, the other women that he had slept with before, like he just comes through town and sleeps with random women. And the next time he picks another one, that's like, and they were strutting around like they're so proud that it was them before. That kind of surprised me too, but maybe it's my modern mores. I don't know, but it just seemed to go against the idea of someone being, I don't know, chaste or respectable or respected.
Yeah, I mean, it calls into question the whole role of what it means to be a Rav, you know, an adjudicator and holder of power and all of that. Janine and then Ellen.
When I initially read the story, I saw it somewhat different. Well, I saw marriage, you know, being married, you're having sex, it's okay, it's what you do. And in a way, I saw it as honoring the woman, even if for one night, that
Yeah.
I said, rather than going around and looking for a prostitute, you're honoring the woman. And I actually went and looked up the page in Safaria, in Yoma 18b, and it's actually quite interesting because it's amongst the purity discussions, and the issue is getting the woman has to be pure before, and the whole negotiation is around the woman being pure. And that is even in the story here. She has to be sure that she's not menstruating. And so I think there are lots of different ways to look at it. And this, you know, we don't know what happened at the time, but I saw it much more as honoring a woman than degrading her. But that's, and interesting that it's amongst purity. The purity issue is a big deal.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really powerful to realize where each of these stories have come from in terms of what Masechet they land in. Because the narrative is pointing to a tiny, almost, you know, it could be huge, but a drop within the entire story. And that's the whole point. Yeah. Thanks for bringing that, Janine. Yeah, Lucy.
In Calderon's story, she talks about this concept of the union being for the sake of heaven.
Yeah.
And I think that's really a key. This is very short, a few lines in the Talmud. And I love that she, you know, kind of honed in on that.
What page is that, Lucy?
Well, you know, I read digitally, so it's somewhere
Page
in the
60.
middle.
60.
Okay, great. And that concept is very specific among the rabbis. When we, you know, when something is pointed out as being, you know, for the sake of heaven, that means that it's really answering to a higher purpose.
Yeah.
And so I like it that Calderon, you know, she was clearly trying to figure this out right for us. Like, why is this happening? You know,
Yeah.
and her conclusion is, you know, because it's the right thing for a much higher purpose than anything that we can think of happening, you know, here.
Yeah. And it is, as you're saying, and I see you, Mark, I definitely want to hear you. There are two central wedding blessings. The first is earthly and primal, which is you're my body and I'm your body, and that's it. It's very concrete and tachlis. The second blessing, a series of blessings that comes after the ring and the ketubah, are the Sheva Brachot, which are the seven very ethereal recreation of the cosmos through these two human beings, a centering and a reminding of Adam and Eve as the original, you know, couple under the chuppah. And the period immediately after the those seven blessing, you know, the sip of wine is taken, and then the couple immediately goes away into what is called yichud, which means, you know, like echad. It means the unity, the coming together, and it's and that's when they were to have consummated the marriage. Right then and there after, during Yichud. And so I loved what she did in terms of painting the scene, because literally that's what happens in a traditional marriage is you haven't had sex, you do these two blessings, you drink this stuff, and you go and, you know, get it on as, you know, as fast as possible because the wedding is not actually complete until consummation. So it's kind of this package deal. And it is considered for the sake of heaven. Yeah, Mark, take it away.
Wow, that was great. I feel like Calderon in, her version of the tale, I mean, which seems so one-sided, it's this man sort of ask, question or stating, they have these needs and who's going to satisfy them. She really develops it as a story of woman empowerment of the woman,
Yeah.
because he gives the Rav gives the woman the handkerchief, which becomes a symbol, of this marriage. And then, he even says, come home with me, as if it's like, wow, you really performed well. You can be my wife, you could be the real deal. This marriage can go on. And she decides in her own mind that the marriage is just, she banishes the idea of having a baby with him. And she doesn't seem to regret at all what happened. It was lovely and wondrous. But the last scene is her dropping the handkerchief onto the bed and presumably, clearing out. I mean, so it's really like she owned it all, got the most out of it, and wasn't a slave to anybody in this. So I find that really remarkable, considering what the base story was.
Yeah. And the handkerchief, just to note, is also part of a traditional and contemporary wedding ceremony. That was the original signature. And it speaks to the radical nature of a Jewish wedding then and now, which is that a woman actually had to physically take something and a man had to physically take something. So even the question of, will you be my bride for a night, is a question. It's not a just, come with me, woman, like you're mine, like it's, there's a dance of choosing, which is unheard of in terms of marriages, historically. Noah.
I was just going to say, after what Mark said, that I was also struck that the brief passage of this story is based on is man-based, but the entire story itself is based on her perspective, that there was this flip around of taking it from the other side instead of having it just be about him.
Yeah. So we have a couple, and I love the connection she did on the bottom of 63 to, is it similar to what Mordecai did in the book of Esther, just the, and that she did, and the paragraph right before that she's describing, why does the notion of multiple wives seem like a realistic solution to the Tosafot, who, like Rashi, were students of Rabbeinu Gershom of Mainz, who explicitly outlawed marriage to more than one woman at the time. Like, she's just so brilliant in her bringing in of, the context. I mean, in some ways, she's expanding the page of Talmud to add in her own narrative, but also continue to cross-reference it, which is just, really great. John, I see your hand.
To add what Mark said, Dr. Calderon on page 64 goes on to speculate what she could have been thinking. And the options that she gives are quite interesting, I thought, about what was really on her mind, including was she burning with desire, which it wasn't likely. But maybe, and then she comes up with the mundane, maybe she was just hungry. But all of her speculation, I thought, was quite good.
Yeah, well, and I think she was burning. I think that was a huge driver. And she wanted, a man. She wanted this moment. And she took it, like Mark was saying. I mean, she took it and then she threw the handkerchief on the bed. It's like almost this role reversal of, at least the the way prostitution is portrayed in the movies, you know, where the guy leaves the $20 or the $3,000 on the bed. And there's a new movie. Have you all heard about this Goodbye and Good Luck movie that's just come out? Oh my God, Google it after this. It's this woman have you seen it, Lucy, or heard about it?
No.
Oh my God, she's a widow, and she basically is aware she's had no, sexual satisfaction. And so she hires this unbelievably beautiful human being, this man, and they have, she makes the list of what she wants. And it's a famous, I'm so culturally illiterate. It's a famous actress who plays it, and she's like in her 60s. And
Oh, Helen Mirren.
Helen Mirren, thank you. Yeah, she's brilliant. And they go through the list, and she just checks them off one by one. But in the process, there's this, deep awakening of love, but love not in mushy gushy, but like, what is desire, and how do we anyway? So yeah, it's really great. If you want to,
That's our homework.
yeah, that's your homework. I love that. Yeah, it can be done with others or alone. Okay, everybody, it's 8:30. I hope you have a beautiful spring, start to spring, and preparation for Pesach. Oh no, I just put if anything, watch the trailer before you go to bed. It'll make you very happy. I'm gonna just stop now. Anyway, happy Pesach.
Fantastic class, Rabbi. Thank you.
Thank you all so much.
Hope to see some of
gonna-
you next Wednesday.
Oh yeah, next Wednesday is our
To see
is
you.
our Siyum, so hopefully we'll see you all there.
Bye.
So we're
Okay,
not doing
thank
this
you.
class next week. We're doing the CUM instead.
Yeah, this is just a 4-weeker.
Oh.
Yeah,
oh.
we could do a part 2, maybe, I don't know, at some point, but
Yes.
That would be great.
all right.
Nice
Wow.
great stories.
Thank
All right.
you.
Bye.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.